Georgia missed the 2023 college football playoff, but they were a national championship contender and one of the best teams in the country that just had a bad day in the SEC championship game. Michigan obviously was a national championship contender last year because they won the whole thing and were the best team in the country. And Washington, Texas, and Alabama were also national title contenders because they made the college football playoff and competed in their losses or in their wins, and then for Washington, lost in the national championship game. Georgia, I think, is in the tier of Oregon and Ohio State, where if the ball had bounced a different way in just one of those teams' games, they would have made the college football playoff most likely, and they could have won the national title or at least won a college football playoff semifinal game. Maybe you could say the same for Florida State if healthy, but injuries are a part of the game, and just see 63-3 in the Orange Bowl. But out of all those 8 teams, or just 7 if you want to exclude Florida State, only 2 of those teams, Oregon and Georgia, are in the top 50 of returning production rankings entering the 2024 season. And only 3 of those teams, Alabama, Texas, and Georgia, return their starting quarterbacks from last year. Milroe and Ewers are back, and Carson Beck is back, as J.J. McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, Jordan Travis, they're off to the NFL, and Kyle McCord transferred from Ohio State to Syracuse. Carson Beck was the only one of those 3 returning quarterbacks to be in the top 10 of QBR, and I think he is in a different league, production-wise and efficiency-wise, compared to those 2, and I think along with Jalen Milroe, he, as in Carson Beck, has a higher ceiling and is going to be a better quarterback this coming season than Quinn Ewers. This is a great spot for Georgia to be in, entering the 2024 season, which I think is going to be a down year in college football. The majority of those teams that I mentioned that were national championship contenders last year, I would pick to beat who I think is the number 1 team in the country entering 2024 right now. I would, whether that's Georgia, whether that's Ohio State, whoever you think's number 1, I would pick most of those teams, if not all of them outside of Florida State, to beat who you think or who I think the number 1 team in the country is. But talking about a program and talking about a team's ceiling, talking about their potential, is Georgia in a tier of their own entering this year with an elite quarterback returning, an elite staff, the best head coach in the country now that Nick Saban has retired, and even though Jim Harbaugh won it all last year, he had one last national championship. Smart beat him, and he's off to the Chargers now. Alabama and Michigan were the next best programs. They were the only other programs that could even be in Georgia's league in terms of on-field success, along with maybe Ohio State over the past 3 seasons. Well, Ryan Day and Kirby Smart are the only 2 head coaches out of those 4 schools that are returning. Michigan is outside of the top 100 in returning production, and Alabama lost a GOAT head coach. They have a new head coach, and they have even more of a new staff with new faces than Michigan does. And they bring in the number 1 recruiting class. They bring in 8 transfers. So what do you think? Tell me down below. Is Georgia in their own tier entering 2024? Because I'll tell you this, the Kirby Smart dynasty is not over. It's, in fact, you could say that it has just begun. Smart is still, honestly, relatively young for a head coach. He has several more years within him. I doubt he is going to leave to the NFL. He is a Georgia alumni. He is not even 50 years old. He's 48. And he is recruiting better than ever. Georgia has large resources. And as of right now, I would say it's the best job in the country. So comment your thoughts down below. And before we resume, welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam. Please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. This is the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube, but I am also trying to branch out, obviously, here and reach out to SEC fans, ACC fans, Big 12 fans, and gosh, I missed the Pac-12. It's now the Power 4 instead of the Power 5. But nothing I can do to change that. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for clicking the notification bell. And thank you for liking the video and commenting your answer to my question down in the comment section below. And last but not least, if you want to support the channel, go the extra mile. No pressure, but check out my merchandise page or my Patreon page via the link in the description or the pinned comment at the top of the comment section. Thanks to all my patrons for sponsoring this video, sponsoring this channel. Your support means the world to me. Now, Georgia, I look at their roster, and I don't see any obvious weaknesses. I know that they lose, obviously, Brock Bowers. I know that they lose Amarius Mims and Cedric Van Pran, awesome offensive linemen on an elite offensive line. They lose Ladd McConkey, who's an underrated wide receiver, very disciplined, sneaky athleticism. They lose Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint. They lose Daijun Edwards and Kendall Milton, all offensive players. Defensively, they lose Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter, impact players in the secondary, and they lose rotational players on the defensive line in Zion Logue and Tremel Wartho. I hope I pronounced that name right. They do lose a fair amount of starters and of players, and they also lose quite a few transfers. They have 21 outgoing transfers, but they have 8 incoming, so that's only a net loss of 13 players via the transfer portal. But they're top 50. Almost said top 20. I mean, I would think with the incoming transfers and recruiting class, they might as well be top 20 in returning production because they're number 1 in SP+, and it's not even close. They're 34.5 in SP+ ranking. The next closest team's Ohio State with a 30.1. So SP+ would say that Georgia is in a tier of their own, and I would agree with that. They have no obvious weaknesses on their roster. That doesn't mean they're without questions. There's a question of, will the run defense improve? Georgia, last year, if they did end up playing Michigan or Washington or Oregon, and maybe Ohio State, if Ohio State's O-line and running back room played like it did against Michigan in some of those drives, Georgia would have had a tough time stopping those run games, particularly Oregon's and even Michigan's and Washington's, despite the fact that Oregon was a much better ground offense. There are questions for Georgia, but the defensive line and the rush defense wasn't a weakness necessarily. It just wasn't elite. So therefore, elite run defenses and elite running backs could push Georgia defensively. They had an elite secondary. They'll have an elite secondary again this year. They return a fair amount of their linebackers. I think Smile Munden Jr. is an elite player. They return Michael Williams, who's now a junior. He started and played as a true freshman. They're very deep on their defensive line and also at edge. And their offensive line, they return Tate Ratledge. They return Dylan Fairchild. They'll have one of the best guard rooms in the country. They return Ernest Green III at tackle. And Dominic Lovett and Ra Thomas return. And Colby Young from Miami and London Humphreys from Vanderbilt transfer in at receiver to have a big impact. Same with Michael Jackson III from USC. And at running back, Branson Robinson and Andrew Paul will be in the backfield, and Trevor Etienne will likely be the starter there. And I think he'll have a big impact. And Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Pierce Spurlin III, and Benjamin Urasek transferring in from Stanford. That, again, I think is the nation's number 1 tight end room, or at least very close. They're number 1 in SP+. They're 47th in returning production. They're 4.4 points better than Ohio State, according to SP+. It's very early in terms of returning production and preseason power rankings because, well, the upcoming portal cycle exists, and there are going to be players, including from Georgia, who will leave the program, but also players who will transfer in. So I do think that Georgia is in a tier of their own. Now, does that mean I think they will win it all this season? Not necessarily, though I am I lean toward that. So far, my college football playoff predictions, in fact, pick Georgia to win it all. But I'm not exactly confident in that because I want to see what the spring portal window provides. There are teams that are literally a few pieces away from potentially being the number 1 team. Ohio State certainly could win it all, especially if their offense improves from last year, while their defense will stay relatively the same or improve given how much they return there. But right now, I do lean Georgia, and right now I'm I'm picking Georgia, but that's very much subject to change. We're still in the early middle of the preseason. We're several months away from kickoff, which that time will fly. But in the meantime, I'll have plenty of content for you all to see. They have the best head coach in the nation. I think with Ben Herbert leaving Michigan for the Chargers, I now think that Georgia has the nation's best strength and conditioning program. They consistently put out first, second, third round picks, and they get other players selected in later rounds. They constantly have turnover to the NFL, and they just plug and play. Next man up, and the next man up typically does a pretty darn good job. They have elite players returning on offense, I think in Carson Beck. ETN's transferring in. I think Oscar Delp is a future elite tight end. On defense, Michael Williams, Smile Munden, Malachi Starks, even Dalen Everett at quarterback. These are also elite players, and there are others that I probably have not fully looked into yet who could be that this coming season. I mean, Georgia is just deep. It's a mistake to underestimate them. Last year, I didn't pick them to win it all because they just had some compound losses that I think affected them, particularly at defensive line. You know, when you lose, in 2021, Jordan Davis leaves. He is a weapon at defensive tackle. And then Jalen Carter leaves. You had back-to-back weapons. Georgia's one of the few schools who can produce back-to-back unicorns at the same position. You typically can't do that for a third or fourth year in a row. It's the same thing with winning it all. The last team to three-peat was in the 40s, 30s. It's hard to three-peat, especially with the portal, especially with the fact that Georgia's not the only school who recruits at the elite level. Ohio State does, Alabama does, Texas is trying to get up there, same with Oregon. And I just happened to be right in picking Michigan to win it all last year and picking Georgia to finish with a 13-1 record. Though I thought they'd make the playoff and beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, not lose to Alabama, and then win the Orange Bowl, which is what happened. But Nick Saban's gone, and I think he was the sole kryptonite to Smart's program overall. Not to a Smart team. We've seen teams in the past, like Ohio State in 2022, be able to target specific weaknesses of Georgia's roster. But your roster constantly changes. I'm talking about at a program long-term window, or at least a speculative short-term window. This team has no obvious weaknesses. We'll know their weaknesses, if whether they're big or more likely whether they're small and nitpicking, by the time that we see them play a few games in fall. But right now, it's very speculative. For Ohio State, you have questions about their offensive line. You have questions about the ceiling of their quarterback play. You even have questions about their tight end room, with Cade Stover leaving, and how far back will their wide receiver room fall with Marvin Harrison Jr. departing. You also have questions about their defensive line and can it play to their high ceiling. For Georgia, you have some questions like Ohio State, but you don't have major questions like can their offensive line even be a good or great offensive line? Can they have great quarterback play? Will Howard just had good quarterback play at Kansas State with a few great flashes? Georgia has elite quarterback play. Look at Alabama. They have questions at quarterback. They have questions on defense with how much they're losing and with the turnover rate they have in their defensive coaching staff. And also losing Caleb Downs and losing Kool-Aid McKinstry at secondary. Texas has questions with Quinn Ewers. Can he play at an elite level? And at defensive tackle with Murphy and Sweat leaving. They have questions about their run defense and about their D-line overall. You don't see that with Georgia. You have minor questions. You have things that you can nitpick, like their run defense or their defensive tackle room. Can it play to that elite level? But Georgia, at minimum, is great everywhere on the field. It's only a question of, are they elite and do they have unicorns at specific positions? So I think absolutely, Georgia this season, they're a physical team. They're in a tier of their own program-wise. We'll see if they win it all this season. There's a chance that I won't have them as my number one team after the portal window, after the spring games, and after I do even more research. But right now, they're a physical team on a mission to win the SEC and the national championship. And as of right now, I'd pick them to do both things. But we'll see. I think that Georgia, no matter if they win it all this year or in following years, Kirby Smart will win more national championships. the way he's recruiting, the way he's developing, the way he puts his staff together, the Georgia dynasty is not slowing down anytime soon. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when I release more college football content. Thanks to Crash2488 for sponsoring this video and channel as a Heisman member. Thanks to Spencer Bringhurst, Chris Lane, and SFS Inverted for sponsoring this video and channel as an All-American member. Thanks to Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, and Janisha Cockrell for sponsoring this video as all conference members. Have a great day, guys, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.